everyone. I tried making scientifically sweets better than box mix chewy brownies, but classic me, I couldn't resist changing some things, and I think it actually resulted in the opposite of the desired effect, which was to get them as chewy as possible with that crinkly top. So, the first thing I changed was to use brown sugar instead of granulated, and I don't like my desserts very sweet, so I halved that quantity, and I think um, the added moisture changed the chemistry of the brownies. I'm not sure, but this is my theory. So I started with scaling out the ingredients. I also used about 2/3 of the icing sugar that she said to use. I figured it was better to use less of both sugars than less of one or the other. This probably also did change the chemistry of the recipe because it seems harder to get brownies as chewy as I want them, and everything I try to do seems to make it worse. So I think in this case, I should have stuck to the original recipe. But anyways, I'm weighing out the flour, and to the flour I added cornstarch, which I thought also contributed to the chewy effect. Um, this wasn't in her recipe, and I think I should have probably left it out, but that's okay. I just learned, and I'll probably make these again without changing anything because I want to see if I can get them the way that they look in the pictures, which is with that crinkly top that I seem to never be able to get. Um, so I'm scaling out the butter here. I used the same amount as she said to use, but she said to simply melt it until it was really hot, and I was like, why not just brown it to add more flavor? But I think this also contributed to the change because when you're browning butter, the water content in the butter evaporates off. And even though it adds flavor, um, that water content is probably needed in the recipe. And my logic was if I use some brown sugar instead of granulated, it would add some more moisture back, which I thought would have balanced the moisture lost from browning the butter, but I don't think it works out that way. So I added the cocoa powder, icing sugar, and also I added some espresso powder because I love having espresso flavor in the background of recipes with chocolate. And I added that to the brown butter to toast it a little bit as the recipe said to do. And I was afraid it would scramble the eggs because the mixture was so hot. So I actually put it in the fridge to cool down a bit while I was doing this step. So the recipe says to whip the eggs with granulated sugar until it gets light and fluffy. This is called the ribbon stage in culinary school. And I just whipped some eggs, and I included a lot of this footage because I thought it was so satisfying to watch the eggs get fluffy and increase in volume. And she said to do this for 3 to 4 minutes. I forgot to set a timer, so I was also concerned that they didn't come out with that crinkly crust because I thought I didn't whip these long enough. So if I make them again, I'm definitely going to set a timer, even though I am pretty sure they did go long enough. And coming up, you can see I even checked them to see with my eyes whether they have that ribbon stage. And you can see it's falling back super thick and fluffy. I think it's so satisfying to look at this part of the process. And now I'm going to start adding the butter cocoa powder mixture, which I had cooled down a bit in the fridge so it wasn't piping hot because I didn't want to scramble the eggs at this point. I And I just make sure they're nice and mixed in. If you notice that it's getting stuck in the whisk, just take it off like I did and mix it by hand to make sure it's homogeneous. So at this point, I thought everything was going great. I felt confident. And the brownies didn't turn out bad. They just came out super fudgy without as much chew as I expected. And I'm dying for that chewy brownie effect. So they still tasted good, especially the next day. They seemed to kind of settle down and mellow into the flavors, and they were even more delicious. So I'm not dissatisfied. Here I held back some of the flour, just about a tablespoon or so. This was the flour cornstarch mixture. And I'm just giving the bowl a scrape to make sure everything's mixed in. This is really important in anything you're baking, to make sure it's a homogeneous mixture and there's nothing stuck on the sides of the bowl. Later I am going to mix it by hand, so don't worry. And a little trick, if you can't get the mixture off the whisk, is just pinch it with your fingers and it'll all come off. All right, now I'm going to add some chocolate chunks. I used bittersweet and milk, and I'm going to toss them with that extra tablespoon or so of flour. I've been doing this since I've started cooking because I've watched Ina Garten so much. And she always mixes her add-ins with flour so that they don't sink to the bottom. So the batter was looking super luscious and shiny at this point. I was super excited. I think it's so satisfying to watch this. I was having fun folding the chocolate chips in. It's the little things. And I just make sure the bowl is scraped, and oh, look at that, it looks so good. I'm gonna add the batter into a greased pan, and she says to use an 8x8 metal pan, but the only 8x8 dish I have is glass, and I would rather bake these in a metal pan to conduct the heat better. This is a 9-inch one, and the surface area is actually super close to an 8x8 pan, so I think it works well. And here I'm just showing a little tip to get the extra batter off the spatula. Just scrape it on the bowl and then it's easier to get everything off. I was having trouble spreading this out in the tin because it was so thick and kept getting stuck to the spatula and just sliding the parchment around. So I actually switched to an offset, but it's super minor. You can just use a spatula if you don't want to get something else dirty. And I just spread this out in an even layer. Eventually I got it to spread. It took longer than it should have though. And I was super excited. I'm gonna get this in the oven, and I think it baked for about the same time that the recipe called for. I think it was like 20 to 22 minutes, and I checked it around 18. It didn't seem done enough. I'm testing it here. It seemed a little soft in the middle. You definitely don't want to overbake, so it's better to under than over, but I baked it for a couple minutes longer. And here I'm getting some slices. This had not cooled yet overnight, but I did refrigerate it for an hour or two, which the recipe says to do, and I wouldn't skip that step. Definitely put it in the fridge to cool down first, to make sure it's super moist and that the flavors get a chance to mellow out in the fridge. This is super common for brownies, and I would always do that. And here you can see right away, it literally looks like fudge. And I was so bummed it didn't get that crust that I wanted, like that shattering, crinkly crust, but I did put a lot of chocolate chips in, which I was not mad about. So overall, I'm probably going to try this again. They were still delicious, but just a different effect than the original recipe. Thanks.